Ernest Delgado stood under the soft glow of the street lamp, the warm Miami breeze rustling his gray hair as he stared at the heavy wooden door of La Bella Notte. He had received the invitation 3 days ago, an unexpected olive branch, after his daughter Bella's furious demand for a $75,000 wedding at the Vizcaya Museum. Ernest had offered $10,000 for a simple beach ceremony, enough for flowers and music, yet Bella and her fiancé Marco had called him selfish and cut off contact. For 3 long weeks, he had wondered if her heart would soften. Now, at 64, in his neat navy blazer and pressed trousers, he wondered if he was making a mistake by coming. The host led him through a candlelit courtyard draped with bougainvillea and inside to a secluded corner where Bella sat alone, glowing in a deep emerald dress. Her dark hair fell in waves, and her eyes flickered when she saw him. He took the seat she offered, and for a moment, the hush of the restaurant and the distant lull of the ocean felt like peace. They spoke quietly about family memories, her first bike ride, his pride at her high school graduation, until Marco arrived, flanked by 3 sharply dressed men carrying briefcases. Ernest greeted him with a polite nod, not yet sensing the trap. Bella's voice trembled as she said she had called these friends to help them talk business. One man placed a thick folder on the table, its leather cover stamped with the seal of his own old law firm, the one he had dissolved 5 years ago to retire in comfort. A waiter poured champagne that bubbled like nervous tension, and the men opened to the first page, a power of attorney, granting Bella and Marco full control over Ernest's bank accounts, property, and insurance. "Sign here, Mr. Delgado," the attorney said, voice smooth as silk. Ernest felt the sting of betrayal, his chest tightening like a trap snapping shut. He remembered Bella's sharp words, "If you won't pay, you'll lose us forever." Now, flashed in law firm ink and legal jargon, was her ultimatum. He slid his hand under the table and touched the small leather briefcase at his feet, the one he had packed only hours before, at his attorney's advice. Inside were counter documents, an irrevocable trust naming his unborn grandson as sole beneficiary and naming his son Miguel trustee. The men glanced up as Ernest met Bella's trembling gaze. He opened his briefcase with calm precision and laid the trust papers alongside their folder. "I, too, prepared for this meeting," he said softly, watching shock and confusion ripple across their faces. As the restaurant lights dimmed around them, Ernest realized that the reconciliation dinner had been an ambush. But he had his own hidden bombshell, a secret plan to protect his legacy and his family. In that hush, he felt a strange relief. The true power of this dinner was no longer in their hands. It was in his. Ernest watched as the attorneys shuffled the trust documents beside their power of attorney folder, the leather seals and embossed lettering catching the soft candlelight. Marco's face was pale, a hint of disbelief in his eyes, while Bella's lower lip trembled as she stared at the papers. The attorney who had first spoken cleared his throat and tried to regain control. "Mr. Delgado," he began, "these trust papers, surely there must be a mistake. An irrevocable trust can be modified under certain conditions." "Not this one," Ernest said calmly, folding his hands on the table. He had chosen every clause with care. The trust was irrevocable, protected by statute, and named only his unborn grandson and his son Miguel as beneficiaries and trustee. No spouse or future spouse would ever touch those assets. Marco's attorney paled and glanced at Bella, whose green eyes filled with tears. Ernest felt no triumph in her pain, only the quiet satisfaction that his preparations had worked. He leaned forward, voice steady. "You demanded my money. You threatened me with loss of family. I refused. You set this trap." Bella closed her eyes, biting her lip. "Dad, you don't understand. We need security. The wedding, our life, depends on it." "Your life is your own to build," Ernest replied, "and I will help you to a point. 10,000 for your wedding is my gift, as I said before, but I will not sign away my future, my home, my independence." Outside, a soft breeze drifted through the open windows, carrying the faint scent of salt air and night-blooming jasmine. It was the kind of breeze that spoke of possibility, of change, and in that moment, Ernest felt the weight of years lift from his shoulders. The attorney fumbled with his papers. The third lawyer, younger and uneasy, glanced at Marco for guidance, but Marco merely bowed his head and ran a hand through his dark hair. Ernest turned to Bella. "I'm proud of you," he said gently, "and I love you. But love isn't a transaction. Bella wiped her cheek, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. Apologies are only words, Ernest said, but actions can prove change. He pushed the trust documents toward Bella. These show my action. Your child's future is secure, but mine is mine. He stood, the legs of his chair scraping softly on the tile. The attorneys rose too, exchanging nervous glances. Marco stood as well, stepping between Bella and the lawyers. I think we should leave, he said, voice tight. Ernest met his gaze and nodded. He gathered his briefcase and put it under his arm. Good evening, he said quietly, then turned and walked toward the courtyard exit. Outside, the tropical night air wrapped around him like a cloak. He paused under a lantern, looking back at the French doors of La Belle Natte, where Bella and Marco's silhouettes were visible through the gauze curtains, shapes blurred by distance and candlelight. In that moment, he felt an unexpected surge of hope. He had stood his ground, protected his legacy, and perhaps saved his daughter from a decision she would resent later. He tucked a hand into his pocket and felt the reassuring weight of his phone and his keys, tokens of his independence. As he walked across the cobblestones, the distant sound of waves lapped against the seawall, a steady rhythm that reminded him life went on beyond family strife. He hailed a taxi, climbing inside and giving the driver his address. The car started, and Miami's lights blurred past. Palms lining Ocean Drive, neon bars flickering, late-night diners gathering under striped awnings. Ernest felt detached from the city's pulse, as if he were riding through someone else's dream. When the taxi turned onto his street, he thanked the driver and stepped onto the sidewalk. His condominium tower loomed above, its glass reflecting the city glow. Inside the lobby, the night clerk nodded and handed him his key card. He rode the elevator alone, the doors closing with a soft click. In his apartment, he leaned into the silence and switched on a small reading lamp beside his leather chair. He unbuttoned his blazer, hung it over the chair's back, and sat down. On the small wooden table beside the chair lay the envelope with his attorney's bill and the final copy of the trust documents. He opened the envelope, glanced at the bill, surprisingly reasonable, and set it aside. Then he unfolded the trust papers again, reading the beneficiary schedule. Eleanor Delgado, born 10/22/25, to receive distributions for education, health, and maintenance. Miguel Delgado, trustee. He traced the typed words with his fingertip and let out a long breath. The plan was in motion. The bombshell had landed. Yet he felt less like a victor and more like a guardian. He poured a small glass of scotch from the decanter on the bar cart, the golden liquid catching the lamp's glow. He lifted the glass, inhaled its smoky aroma, and sipped. The warmth spread through him, steady and strong. He thought of Bella as a little girl, her laughter as she chased seagulls on the beach, the scraped knee he had bandaged with tears and ice. He thought of the woman she had become, ambitious and proud, qualities he admired, yet guided poorly. He realized that this confrontation, though painful, could become a turning point to teach her the value of respect and boundaries. He finished his drink and set the glass down. Midnight approached. The city's hum softened. Ernest stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark water beyond the lights. He whispered into the silence, "Sleep well, Bella. One day, you'll see why I did this." He turned away and headed to the bedroom, his steps sure and calm. Tomorrow, he would call Miguel, reassure him, and perhaps reach out to Bella again, this time on his terms. He switched off the lamp, lay on the cool sheets, and closed his eyes, the rhythm of his own heartbeat lulling him into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, Ernest woke before dawn, still feeling the calm determination that had carried him through the dinner ambush. He made coffee in his small kitchen, the quiet hum of the machine and the gentle hiss of brewing grounds a comforting ritual. He sat at the table and dialed his son Miguel's number. When Miguel answered, bleary but concerned, Ernest told him the story. How Bella and Marco had brought lawyers to the dinner, how Ernest had prepared his own trust documents in secret, and how the trust would protect his assets, naming his grandson Eleanor and Miguel as trustee. Miguel listened in silence, then said, "Dad, you did the right thing. I'll support you." Ernest felt relief wash over him. After they hung up, he drafted a clear, calm letter to Bella, typed on his computer at the dining table. He began simply, "Bella, I love you. I always will. But I cannot allow others to control my life or my savings. The dinner showed me how far you were willing to go. Your child's future is secure through the irrevocable trust. I still want to be part of your family, and I still offer 10,000 toward your wedding. But I will not sign away my independence. If you respect my boundaries, we can rebuild our relationship. Love, Dad. He printed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope addressed to Bella. Later that morning, he drove to his financial advisor's office to confirm the trust had been properly recorded at the county courthouse. He reviewed the paperwork. The trust was dated days before the dinner, fully funded, and notarized. He signed a few final documents and asked his advisor to notify him immediately if any attempt was made to breach or contest the trust. The advisor nodded gravely, impressed by Ernest's foresight. From there, Ernest went to his small repair shop, where he fixed fishing reels and cleaned old brass compasses. One regular customer, Mr. Alvarez, asked about his late-night meeting. Ernest said only, "Family matters." The customer nodded, then changed the subject to a broken reel. By mid-afternoon, Ernest returned home to find a text from Bella. "Got your letter. Can we talk? B." He hesitated, then texted back, "Meet me at Miguel's office at 5 p.m. In the early evening, he walked into the sleek lobby of the glass and steel building where Miguel worked as a pediatrician in the attached clinic. Bella arrived with Marco 15 minutes later, looking anxious in a fitted navy blazer. Miguel led them into his private office. Bella set the envelope on the desk but did not open it. She said, voice trembling, "Dad, I'm sorry. We overreacted. We never meant to push you like that. Please forgive us." Ernest folded his hands on his lap and regarded his daughter. "I forgive you, Bella, as a father. But I ask you to forgive me for taking precautions. I knew you might try to control my money. The trust was the only way to protect us all." Marco opened his mouth, but Miguel raised a hand to stop him. Marco nodded and folded his arms. Bella reached into her bag, pulled out a printed email thread between herself and a private investigator Marco had hired, showing photos of Ernest meeting with neighbors, supposedly to prove he was unwell. She said, with a tear in her eye, "Dad, I was scared. We thought you might make decisions that hurt your health or your business. We thought we were helping." Ernest listened, anger and sorrow mingling inside him. "Help is welcome," he said, "but not when it comes with threats or ultimatums. I survived 2 strokes of bad luck, losing my wife, then a bad business deal. I know when I need help, and I know how to ask. You did not ask, you demanded." Bella wiped her tears. Marco shifted uneasily. Miguel cleared his throat. "Isabella, your father has offered 10,000 toward the wedding. That is generous. Can you accept that and move on?" Bella's eyes darted between them. She swallowed hard, nodded slowly, and said, "Yes, 10,000 will cover most of the florist and the venue deposit." Ernest inclined his head. "Good, we can put this behind us. I still want to walk you down the aisle." Bella smiled through tears. Marco looked relieved. Miguel closed his laptop and rose. "Shall we?" He led Bella and Marco to the door, then paused. "Dad," he said quietly, "you did well." Ernest touched his son's arm. "Thank you." Back in his condo that night, Ernest poured himself a single scotch and sat by the window. He reflected on the day's events, the dinner trap, the trust launch, the meeting at Miguel's office, and Bella's apology. He felt pride in standing firm, sadness in the rift he had to mend, and hope in his daughter's willingness to change. He finished his drink and placed the glass on the table, then turned out the lamp and climbed into bed. The next morning, he awoke to a call from Miguel. Bella and Marco had signed the adjusted wedding contract, reducing the budget and removing their lawyer clause. They wanted only a small ceremony on the beach, as he had first suggested. As he dressed for the day, Ernest realized the hidden revenge bombshell of the irrevocable trust had done more than protect his assets. It had humbled Bella and Marco, reminded them of respect and love, and cleared the way for a stronger bond built on trust instead of money. He smiled to himself, ready to face whatever came next, confident that he had safeguarded not only his livelihood, but his family's future in Miami. The morning of Bella and Marco's beach wedding arrived with a soft pastel sunrise over Biscayne Bay, the sky streaked in rose and gold as if celebrating the new beginning Ernest had reluctantly agreed to support. He stood on the terrace of his condo, dressed in a light gray linen suit that felt both comfortable and dignified in the Miami heat. He sipped strong coffee and reviewed the day's timeline on his phone. Ceremony at 10, brunch reception at the Bayside Pavilion at noon, a brief speech at 1:15 of the reception. He checked his reflection in the sliding glass door and adjusted his cufflinks, simple silver, engraved with his late wife's initials. At 64, Ernest had long since learned that small details carried weight. He drove to the beach in his sedan, parking at the curb under a row of swaying palms. The breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine, and the distant sound of waves mingled with early bird chatter. He stepped onto the white sand, where chairs draped in ivory linen faced a bamboo arch adorned with tropical blooms. A few guests had already arrived. Miguel greeted him with a quick hug and a reassuring wink. Under the arch, Bella stood with Marco, her white dress billowing like a sail, her dark hair pinned back with a single orchid. She looked radiant yet nervous, her eyes searching for her father. Ernest walked toward her with measured steps, each one grounded in the steadfast resolve he had forged since the dinner confrontation. As he approached, Bella's hand lifted in a slight wave, and she gave him a hesitant smile. He lifted his hat. No words spoke louder than that gesture of old-fashioned courtesy. The officiant tapped a glass to call the ceremony to order, and the guests fell silent. Ernest took his place beside Miguel and offered a small half-smile to Marco, who nodded grimly in return. But when Marco turned to look back at Bella, his eyes flicked nervously toward Ernest's open briefcase at the foot of the arch, the one containing the original trust documents, now harmlessly tucked away, but still a symbol of the father's protective maneuver. The ceremony proceeded. Vows exchanged, rings slipped onto trembling fingers, cheers and applause as Bella and Marco sealed their marriage with a kiss. Yet beneath the sunlit joy, there pulsed a quiet reminder of what had happened 3 weeks earlier, the betrayal, the ambush, the trust bombshell that had shifted power back to Ernest's hands. After the ceremony, the small delegation walked up a winding boardwalk to the pavilion. Beneath a canopy of palm fronds, tables brimmed with fresh fruit, mango-glazed chicken skewers, and bowls of citrus salad. Ernest found his seat next to Bella and Miguel. Marco sat across, glancing around as if waiting for another surprise. The DJ played soft Latin jazz, and guests laughed easily. Ernest raised his glass when Miguel tapped it to call for attention. He stood, cleared his throat, and looked first at Bella, then at Marco, then at the circle of friends and family gathering around them. "I want to congratulate you both," he began, voice warm. "Today is a celebration of love, family, and new beginnings." He paused, letting the sun-dappled moment settle. "I know the path to this day wasn't smooth. We had disagreements, big ones. But I believe disagreements can teach us valuable lessons about respect and boundaries." Bella's cheek quivered, and she reached for Ernest's hand under the table. He gave it a gentle squeeze. "When you demanded more than I could give, I had to protect my life's work. Not just for me, but for the future of our family. So I created a trust to safeguard your child's inheritance." Gasps rippled around the tables as the memory of the ambush dinner rose in the listeners' minds. Marco's face darkened, but Bella nodded solemnly. "That trust wasn't meant to punish you," Ernest continued, "but to show how much I care for you and for the little one we'll meet in October. It taught me that love sometimes requires difficult choices. It also taught me that you, Bella, are capable of growth and understanding." Tears glittered in Bella's eyes. Marco shifted uncomfortably, his handshake grasping at empty air. Ernest lifted his glass higher. "To Bella and Marco, may your marriage be as strong as the boundaries we set, as enduring as the trust we build, and as joyful as this beautiful day." The crowd echoed, "Cheers!" and champagne flutes chimed. After the toast, laughter resumed, and the brunch buffet opened. Ernest sat back down, feeling a quiet pride in having turned his hidden revenge bombshell into a lesson embroidered with love. Over plates of coconut-battered shrimp and guava pastries, Bella approached him once more. "Dad," she said softly, "thank you for being honest and for giving us your blessing." Ernest smiled, patting her hand. "Thank you for listening." Marco lingered nearby, then exhaled and extended his hand. "Mr. Delgado," he said, voice subdued, I'm grateful for your support. I promise to honor your daughter and the trust you've placed in me." Ernest nodded curtly and shook his hand. Later, as the sun climbed higher and the celebration wound down, Ernest stepped away to walk the beach alone. He felt the sand under his shoes, the surge of waves at his ankles, and the bright Miami sky above. He thought of his own father's words about standing up for what matters, and he realized that the bombshell of the trust and the beach ceremony had forged a new respect between him and his daughter. He had refused to be intimidated. He had protected his legacy, and now, in this shared triumph, he saw the possibility of an enduring bond. As he returned to the pavilion, he spotted Bella and Marco gathering their things, happiness in their expressions, a tenderness in their touch. He recognized, perhaps for the first time, that a father's hidden revenge could become a foundation for genuine reconciliation, one built not on coerced generosity, but on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and the promise of true family unity. Months later, Ernest stood on the balcony of his condo, gazing at the sunrise turning Biscayne Bay to molten gold, the same view he had watched on the morning of Bella's wedding. The powder blue sky reminded him that life continued to surprise, even after stormy seas. Since the ceremony, he and Bella had regained a fragile harmony. Weekly phone calls, dinner once a month, and texts filled with photos of Eleanor's first steps and gummy smiles. The trust had remained intact, invoked only when Bella questioned logistical details, yet it had become less a weapon and more a safety net, a silent testament to a father's love framed by firm boundaries. Today, he was headed to the hospital nursery for Eleanor's first birthday. Clad in a crisp white shirt and light gray trousers, Ernest tucked the small wrapped box under his arm. A silver music box engraved with her name, ready to play a lullaby when wound. He drove along Ocean Drive, windows down, letting the warm breeze carry thoughts of the past months. The betrayal, the ambush in the candlelit courtyard, the trust documents that had flipped power back to him, the beach wedding under the bamboo arch, and the cautious steps toward reconciliation. He parked near the hospital, its white pillars gleaming, and walked through the automatic doors into the hushed corridor lit by fluorescent lights. Nurses in pastel scrubs passed with charts in hand, and small clusters of visitors gathered outside rooms, exchanging quiet greetings. At the nurses' station, he asked for the nursery and was directed down a short hallway to two glass doors marked newborns and toddlers. Inside, soft lullabies floated through speakers, and the pastel-painted room was lined with cribs holding sleeping babies. A nurse approached, smiling warmly. "Mr. Delgado, your granddaughter is up and playing." She led him to a low table where Eleanor sat in a pink dress, wobbly on her chubby legs, knocking blocks together with pure delight. Bella knelt beside her, tears shining in her eyes when she saw her father enter. Marco stood behind them with Miguel, who grinned broadly. "Happy birthday, Mom," Bella said softly, an inside joke from birth, when everyone called her Mom before little Eleanor was born. Ernest smiled and knelt to Eleanor's level, offering her the music box. The baby's eyes widened at the silver sheen, and when he wound it, the gentle melody of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" tinkled. Eleanor's laughter rang like bells. She reached out with pudgy hands to touch her grandfather's face. Ernest felt tears bloom in his chest. "You've grown so fast," he whispered, lifting her for a hug. She patted his shoulder with gummy accuracy. "Thank you," he told Bella, who touched his arm. "This means everything." Bella glanced at Marco and Miguel before turning back, voice steady. "Dad, I'm grateful for the trust, the wedding, and for Eleanor. You made me see how to protect her future without losing my humanity." Ernest held his granddaughter close, breathing in her baby-scented hair, and nodded. "I made you see boundaries aren't barriers. They're guides." Bella reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I wanted you to have this," she said, handing it to him. He opened it to find a copy of her updated will, a clause making him guardian of Eleanor should anything happen to Bella and Marco, and a note that she had reduced her share of the trust's remainder to leave more for future generations. He looked up, surprised and moved. "You did this?" Bella smiled through tears. "I realized my mistakes. I wanted you to know I trust your judgment, not just as my father, but as Eleanor's grandfather." Ernest felt warmth spread through his chest. He had given her the lesson. Now she was passing it forward. Marco stepped closer. "Mr. Delgado, I know I made mistakes. I'm committed to your daughter and our family." Ernest studied him, the hard set of his jaw, the sincerity in his eyes. "I'll hold you to that," he said quietly, and Marco nodded. Miguel patted his shoulder. "Welcome to the real family, Dad," he joked. Ernest laughed, lifting Eleanor higher. "Thank you, Miguel." They spent the next hour in that sunlit room, Bella feeding baby cake by hand, Eleanor smearing frosting across her face, Marco wiping dribbles with a gentle smile, and Ernest taking candid photos on his phone. It was ordinary joy, punctuated by the low hum of hospital life, and punctuated by that single, precious scream of baby laughter. When it was time to leave, Bella held the car door open for her father. Eleanor, tired from excitement, dozed in his arms against a soft blanket. The afternoon sun glinted on the city skyscrapers as they drove home. In the condo, Janet Waters awaited with homemade chicken salad sandwiches and lemonade. She beamed at the baby's rosy cheeks. Over the meal, they laughed together, recounting childhood stories. Bella's scraped knees, Miguel's first medical emergency at age 7 when he stitched his own finger with his father's needle and thread, and how Ernest had chased neighborhood dogs off the lawn. Each story was a thread weaving them closer. Later that evening, after Bella and Marco took Eleanor for her bedtime bottle, Ernest poured himself a scotch and sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. He watched his daughter and son-in-law tuck their child into her crib through the window, silhouettes of family peace. He thought back to the night of the ambushed dinner, when betrayal had stung like salt spray, and marveled at how it had led him here, to a deeper bond built on love, respect, and unbreakable boundaries. He raised his glass to the moonlit bay. "To family," he whispered. The breeze carried his words toward the night sky. Tomorrow, he would return to his repair shop, to his volunteer work at the senior center, and to whatever new joys and challenges life brought. But tonight, he savored this moment. A father's quiet victory, a daughter's humility, a grandson's laughter, and a future secured by wisdom earned through trials. In Miami's warm, humid air, Ernest Delgado felt contentment he had never known before. A man who had refused to be manipulated, engineered his own hidden bombshell of revenge, and transformed it into a foundation for true family reconciliation. And as he watched his granddaughter sleep in peaceful innocence, he knew that the greatest legacy he could leave was the example of a life lived with integrity, courage, and love.